The sun had barely cleared the moss-draped oaks of Savannah when Delilah Monroe pressed her hand against her daughter's forehead and knew something wasn't right. Maisie wasn't one to complain, always a whirlwind of curiosity and questions, never still long enough to catch her breath. But today she was pale, quiet, and cradling her arm close to her chest like it held the world's most delicate secret. "Baby, does it still hurt?" Delilah asked, crouching beside the bed, brushing a stray curl from Maisie's cheek. Maisie nodded. "It hurts when I move it, or when I don't." Delilah's heart pinched. She'd hoped it was just a bruise from yesterday's tumble off the monkey bars. Kids fall. But this felt deeper. She didn't hesitate. "Let's get dressed, sweet pea. Mama's taking you to the hospital." The ride through Savannah's historic district passed in a blur of brick sidewalks, slow-moving trolleys, and the hum of early morning life. Delilah's mind spun faster than the tires. And she kept glancing at Maisie in the rearview mirror. Her quiet breathing, the way her little fingers trembled when she shifted in her seat. They pulled into the roundabout of St. Jude Regional Medical Center just after 8. The red brick building sat nestled between two magnolia trees, its clean facade belying the storm it was about to house. Inside, the emergency room was already bustling. Nurses walking briskly, beeping monitors echoing faintly from behind drawn curtains. The scent of antiseptic and old coffee clung to the air. "Name?" the nurse at the check-in desk asked, typing without looking up. "Maisie Monroe, 6 years old, possible arm injury." The nurse handed her a clipboard. "Have a seat. You'll be called shortly." Delilah settled into the stiff chair beside her daughter. Maisie leaned against her shoulder. "I don't like hospitals," she whispered. Delilah kissed the top of her head. "Me neither, baby. But we'll be out of here soon, okay?" She tried to smile, but something inside her wouldn't settle. A twinge of anxiety, strange, electric, like a forgotten door creaking open somewhere deep in her memory. The nurse called them in 15 minutes later. A young orderly led them down a long hallway to exam room 3. The door was ajar. The room itself was sterile and quiet, a thin shaft of morning light cutting through the blinds. "The doctor will be in shortly," the orderly said, closing the door behind them. Delilah helped Maisie onto the exam table, gently adjusting the sling she'd tied with one of her scarves. She tried to keep her hands steady, but her stomach was doing somersaults. Something about today felt off-kilter, unfamiliar, and yet familiar. She heard footsteps, firm, steady, shoes that didn't shuffle. Then the door opened, and in stepped Julian Cross. The clipboard in his hand fell against his thigh. Delilah's breath hitched. He hadn't changed much. If anything, he looked sharper. Clean-cut jawline, deeper lines around his eyes, tailored charcoal coat over blue scrubs. Still wearing that impossibly calm expression, like the world never dared to knock him off balance. His eyes locked onto hers, and then they widened. "Delilah?" he said, barely above a whisper. Every second stretched like taffy. The hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed louder. Maisie blinked at the stranger who had suddenly frozen in the doorway. Delilah stood slowly. "Hello, Julian." His name felt strange in her mouth, like a word she hadn't spoken in years, because she hadn't. Julian took one cautious step into the room. His eyes dropped to Maisie, then bounced back up to Delilah. I didn't know you were in Savannah," he said. "Clearly." He swallowed. "You look tired," she interrupted. "Because my daughter's arm might be broken." Julian nodded once, shaken but recovering. "Right. Of course." "Let me take a look." Delilah moved to the side as Julian approached the table. Maisie stared at him, wide-eyed. "Hey there," he said gently, kneeling to her level. "What's your name?" "Maisie." she said shyly. That's a pretty name. He glanced at Delilah briefly. Can you tell me what happened, Maisie? I fell off the monkey bars at school. Yesterday. He nodded slowly, examining her arm with careful hands. Delilah watched him. Not just his movements, but the way he looked at Maisie. There was a flicker there, of something unspoken, a calculation just beneath the surface. I'm going to order an X-ray, he said after a pause. Just to be safe. Doesn't feel like a break, but better to be sure. Maisie nodded, biting her lip. Julian turned to Delilah. A tech will be in soon. Once we get the scans, I'll let you know what we're dealing with. Thank you, Delilah said, polite but cold. He lingered a second longer, as if wanting to say more. Then he left. Delilah exhaled for the first time in minutes. Maisie looked up at her. Do you know him? She hesitated. A long time ago. Is he a good doctor? Delilah smiled faintly. He used to dream about it every day. A tech arrived shortly after, and Delilah followed them down the hall to radiology. She watched Maisie through the glass as the machine clicked and buzzed. Her tiny frame looked even smaller under the bright light. By the time they returned to the exam room, Julian was already there, holding up the X-ray against a backlight. No fracture, he said. Just a soft tissue contusion. She'll be sore for a few days, but she's going to be fine. Maisie smiled. So I can go back to school? Maybe after the weekend, he chuckled. We'll give you a cool sling to wear in the meantime. He turned to Delilah. Do you have a minute after this? She didn't answer at first. Then she nodded. Once Maisie settled, Julian handed her the prescription and left the room again. Maisie was coloring on the paper table cover with the crayons the nurse had given her. She glanced up. He has your eyes, she said matter-of-factly. Delilah froze. What do you mean, baby? Maisie shrugged. The same kind. Kind of sleepy-looking but serious. Delilah felt her knees threaten to give out. She wasn't ready for this. Not today. Not now. But the truth was already knocking, and it was wearing a white coat with Julian's name stitched across the pocket. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Delilah stood just outside the glass doors of St. Jude Regional, the soft hum of the automatic doors behind her sounding more like a warning than a welcome. She held Maisie's discharge papers in one hand, the sling neatly adjusted on her daughter's arm with a nurse's care. The sun was higher now, climbing past the historic rooftops and filtering through the long limbs of the oak trees. Maisie tugged at her hand. Can we go to Miss Lila's for lemonade? Delilah smiled, forcing lightness into her voice. Maybe later, honey. Mama's got a few errands to run. Maisie nodded and leaned her head into Delilah's side, quiet again. But Delilah's thoughts weren't quiet. They were roaring. Julian Cross. Of all the doctors in Savannah, why him? Why today? She hadn't seen him in nearly 7 years, not since he walked away with a full ride to Johns Hopkins, and dreams bigger than this city could ever hold. Not since she stood on her porch in the sticky dusk, clutching the pregnancy test and his goodbye letter in the same hand. She never told him. And now, just like that, he was standing in front of her, with the same voice, the same eyes, the same calm confidence. She looked down at Maisie. Those eyes were no longer hers alone. A soft chime came from her phone, a text from Janelle. Everything okay? You disappeared off the planet this morning. Delilah typed back quickly. ER, Maisie's arm. She's okay. Long story. 3 dots. Then, I'm making tea. Come over. Spill. She didn't reply. She couldn't yet. As she clicked Maisie into the booster seat and closed the car door, she felt a presence behind her. Calm, deliberate footsteps on gravel. Delilah. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. She closed her eyes for a second longer than necessary, then turned. Julian stood near the passenger side, hands in his coat pockets, sleeves rolled up just enough to show the edge of a watch he couldn't have afforded back then. "Is it okay if we talk?" he asked, his voice lower now, like he already knew the answer might be no. She exhaled through her nose, keeping her voice even. "About what?" He stepped closer. "About Maisie. About everything." Delilah crossed her arms. "She's fine, Julian. You said so yourself." "Bruised, not broken. I'm not talking about her arm." Her breath caught again. She looked around at the nurses walking out for lunch. A mother wheeling her toddler across the lot. Everyday life still moved, while hers felt like it had crashed into something invisible. "I have to get her home," she said, turning to the driver's side. "Delilah, wait." She stopped, her hand on the door. "Don't do this here." He didn't press further, just nodded once. "I'll be in touch," he said, gently. She didn't look back as she drove off. By the time she arrived at Janelle's front porch, Maisie was asleep in the back seat, head tilted to the side, her lashes fanned against her cheeks. Delilah carried her in and laid her on the floral couch with a blanket. Janelle met her in the kitchen with 2 mugs of sweet tea. "Tell me everything." Delilah's hands trembled as she wrapped them around the mug. The kitchen smelled like chamomile and lemon zest. "Safe things." "I walked into that ER," she started, voice tight, "and the doctor who saw Maisie was Julian." Janelle didn't say anything at first. "Julian Cross?" she asked finally, like maybe there was another Julian she didn't know about. Delilah nodded. "He didn't recognize her," she continued, staring into her tea. "Not right away, but I saw the moment it clicked. Or started to." Janelle leaned back in her chair. "Lord, that's a twist I wasn't expecting this morning." Delilah swallowed hard. "He wants to talk. He followed me out to the parking lot." "Did you tell him?" "No." Silence settled between them, filled only by the soft tick of the wall clock. "Dee," Janelle said, her voice careful. "Are you ever going to?" Delilah rubbed her temple. "I don't know. He left. He made a choice. But he didn't know. That was my choice." They sat in that gray space for a moment, the line between right and wrong blurry as ever. "He's engaged," Delilah added suddenly. "I saw it on his hand. Platinum band. And the nurse said he's marrying the hospital's PR director." Janelle raised an eyebrow. "Savannah's real small when it wants to be." Delilah took a slow sip of tea. "He's not just a doctor now. He's someone else. Polished. Powerful. Like he walked straight out of a magazine. But when he looked at you," Delilah met her friend's eyes, "he looked like he'd seen a ghost." Julian sat in his office, the late afternoon sun pooling through the blinds in fractured lines. The X-ray images were still on his monitor, but he wasn't seeing them. Maisie Monroe, Delilah. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The girl had his smile, his exact damn smile. And those eyes, the way she tilted her head, the way she answered questions. There was a rhythm in her speech he hadn't heard since he and Delilah used to lay in the park, and talk for hours under the stars. She hadn't said it, but he knew. And if he was right, he had a daughter. The knock on his door was sharp, controlled. "Come in," he said, clearing his throat. Tessa stepped in, perfectly styled, clipboard in hand. "I saw your car was still out front. You're staying late?" He nodded, trying to shift his expression back to neutral. "Just finishing up a few cases." She stepped closer. "Everything okay?" He nodded again, slower this time. "Just a strange day." Tessa watched him carefully, then crossed the room and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Well, whatever it is, let it go. We have the board dinner tomorrow, remember? My mother will be there. Try not to look like you've seen a ghost." Julian managed to smile. Right, the board. But his thoughts were already elsewhere. In a house with white curtains and a little girl who looked too much like him to ignore. In the space Delilah left behind, and in the question that now refused to leave him alone. Why hadn't she told him? Or maybe the better question, why did it still matter this much? The bell above the flower shop door chimed as Delilah flipped the sign to open. The morning sun hadn't fully warmed the sidewalks yet, and the soft scent of gardenias filled the air like a whisper of calm she didn't really feel. She moved through the shop methodically, watering succulents, rearranging peonies, wiping down the counter. Everything had its place. Everything needed to stay in its place. If her hands were busy, maybe her heart would quiet down. But it didn't. Not after yesterday. Not after seeing him. Maisie had gone off to school with her favorite scarf wrapped carefully around her sling, proudly telling Delilah she looked like a pirate with a secret. The image made Delilah smile, until the ache followed right behind it. Julian's voice still echoed in her ears. "Is she mine?" She hadn't answered him. She'd walked away instead, dragging the weight of 7 years behind her, like it had just doubled overnight. The door chimed again. "Morning, sunshine," came a warm voice. Janelle strolled in, carrying 2 coffees and a look that said, "We're talking whether you like it or not." Delilah raised a brow. "I didn't say I needed caffeine intervention." "You didn't have to," Janelle said, handing her a cup. "You saw your ghost yesterday. That qualifies for coffee and counseling." Delilah took the drink and leaned against the counter. "He followed me out to the car." Janelle's eyes widened. "And?" "He asked to talk. I told him it wasn't the place." "Well, is there a place?" Delilah didn't answer. She sipped her coffee instead. Janelle tilted her head. "Look, I'm not saying you owe him anything. I'm saying this could get real complicated real fast, especially if he figures it out before you say it." "He already has," Delilah murmured. "What?" He looked at her like... Her voice cracked. Like something clicked, like he was seeing his own reflection and didn't know what to do with it. Janelle went quiet for a moment, the weight of it hanging in the air. "You're still in love with him?" Delilah looked up sharply. "I am not." "You didn't even hesitate to deny it." "I haven't thought about him in years." "You're thinking about him now." Delilah exhaled, slow and shaky. "That man broke me, Janelle. He left. He chose to go." "You didn't give him a reason to stay," Janelle said softly. Delilah stiffened. "I'm not blaming you," Janelle added quickly. "I'm saying none of this was simple back then. It still isn't." Delilah looked out the window at the passing cars, the quiet buzz of the day beginning. "I didn't tell him because I didn't want to be the girl who begged a man to stay for a child. I didn't want to trap him." "Did you ever think maybe it wasn't a trap?" Janelle asked. Maybe it was a gift. The silence between them stretched. Delilah looked down at the locket around her neck, the one Julian gave her the summer before he left. She'd tucked Maisie's hospital bracelet inside it after she was born. It had stayed there ever since. The doorbell chimed again. Both women turned. Julian stood just inside the entrance, holding a small bouquet, delicate blue hydrangeas and yellow snapdragons. His eyes found Delilah's, like they'd never stopped looking. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said quietly. Janelle cleared her throat. "Actually, I was just leaving." She squeezed Delilah's arm on her way out, the gesture more supportive than any words could be. Julian stepped forward, slowly, like he knew one wrong move might shatter the whole room. "You remembered," Delilah said, nodding toward the bouquet. His mouth twitched into a hint of a smile. "Hydrangeas for apology, snapdragons for strength, your favorite." Delilah took a breath. "You didn't come here to talk flowers." "No," he admitted. "I came because I can't stop thinking about her, about you, about what I didn't know, and what I'm starting to understand." She leaned on the counter, trying to steel herself. "Say it." Julian's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maisie's mine." Delilah looked down. "She's mine." He nodded slowly. "And that makes her ours." Delilah's eyes snapped to his. "I'm not trying to push," Julian said. I can't pretend I didn't see it." Her eyes, her laugh. "Delilah, I missed 6 years of her life, and I didn't even know I was supposed to be looking." Delilah closed her eyes for a moment, pain flashing across her face. "I didn't want to raise her in resentment. I didn't want her to grow up wondering why her father didn't choose her. I never chose away from her," he said firmly. "I didn't even know she existed. That doesn't undo the hurt." "No. But maybe it can start the healing." She met his gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. An ache, a flicker of hope, a shared grief neither had ever dared to voice. "I didn't come here to make you feel guilty," he said. "I came because I want to know her. If you'll let me. If she'll let me." Delilah didn't answer. She just stared at him, emotions warring behind her eyes. Julian took a small step back. "I'll go. I needed you to know." He turned toward the door. "Julian." He paused, hand on the handle. "She loves story time. She insists on reading the last line herself." He turned, slowly. "And she likes peanut butter on waffles, not pancakes." A flicker of a smile. "And she's already convinced she's going to be a paleontologist." Julian's eyes lit up. "I'll brush up on dinosaurs." Delilah let out a soft laugh, despite herself. It cracked something open in the air between them. "She's a good kid," she said. "You don't get to just walk in and be her world, Julian." "I don't want to be her world," he said quietly. "I want to earn a place in it." Their eyes met again, the years between them, folding like pages in a book, finally reopened. And for the first time in a long time, Delilah didn't feel like she was holding all the pieces alone. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The late afternoon sun spilled across the hardwood floors of Delilah's living room, casting soft amber shadows over the open picture books scattered across the rug. Maisie sat cross-legged, her sling still snug on her shoulder, turning the pages of a dinosaur encyclopedia with theatrical flair. "Did you know the Stegosaurus had a brain the size of a lime?" she said, scrunching her nose like the idea offended her personally. Delilah smiled from the kitchen doorway, a dish towel in her hands. Well, that explains your Uncle Nate, she teased. Maisie giggled, then looked up with a sudden spark in her eye. Do you think I could show this to that doctor? The one with the nice shoes? Delilah blinked. Dr. Cross? Maisie nodded. Yeah. He listened when I talked. Like really listened. Delilah stepped into the room, her voice soft. You liked him? Maisie shrugged, like she was trying to play it cool. He didn't talk to me like I was little. That's rare. Delilah sat beside her, trying to ignore the ache forming in her chest. Well, that's kind of his thing. Listening. Maisie tilted her head. Do you know him? The question lingered, heavy and sharp in the quiet. Delilah considered her answer, then reached for the locket around her neck, rolling it between her fingers like a worry stone. A long time ago, she said quietly. We were friends. Maisie studied her mother's face for a beat, then went back to flipping pages. He looks like me, she said under her breath. Not accusing, just noticing. Delilah couldn't bring herself to respond. There was a knock at the door. She froze. Maisie looked up again. Are we expecting someone? Delilah stood slowly. No. Her pulse quickened as she crossed the room and opened the door. Julian stood on the porch, holding 2 small paper bags and a stack of children's books tucked under one arm. He looked unsure, even a little nervous, which made him seem human again. I hope this isn't too forward, he said. I wasn't sure how to reach you, but I figured the flower shop might not be the best place for a first conversation with her. Delilah stepped aside. Maisie lit up as soon as she saw him. You came back. Julian's smile softened everything. I did, and I brought bribes. He held up the bags. Waffle sandwiches. Peanut butter, of course. Delilah gave him a sideways look, caught between rolling her eyes and smiling. Smooth. Julian knelt beside Maisie and opened one of the books. Thought maybe we could do a little story time, if that's okay. Maisie nodded, scooting closer without hesitation. Delilah watched from the doorway as Julian settled in beside her daughter, letting Maisie choose which book to read first. She chose the dinosaur one, of course. He read each line with care, pausing when Maisie interrupted with questions, letting her correct his pronunciation with mock indignation. Delilah tried to ignore how natural it all looked, how easy. But the tension wrapped itself tighter around her chest with every passing second. She moved to the kitchen and busied herself with dishes she didn't need to clean, fighting the tears pressing behind her eyes. This was dangerous. This was what heartbreak looked like before it happened. Again. 20 minutes later, Maisie was curled up on the couch, head resting against Julian's side, drifting somewhere between awake and asleep. The open book lay in her lap, a folded paper napkin in her hand, like she'd fallen asleep mid-thought. Julian looked up, his voice low. She's incredible. Delilah leaned against the doorframe. She's everything. Julian gently adjusted the blanket around Maisie's shoulders, then stood. She didn't even flinch when I walked in. She trusts what feels true, Delilah said. She doesn't know any other way. Julian stepped into the kitchen. Delilah didn't move. She looks just like you, he said. Delilah smiled faintly. Not always. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me? Delilah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Because I wasn't sure you'd want to know. And then, when I was sure, it felt too late. You had a whole new life. I had ambition. Not a life. Well, you do now. Engagement ring and all. Julian rubbed the back of his neck. Tessa and I, it's not what it looks like. Delilah raised an eyebrow. That's what people say when it's exactly what it looks like. He laughed softly. Fair. But the truth is, we were convenient. Two people in the same orbit. We both looked good on paper. And off paper? Julian hesitated. She doesn't know me. Not really. Not the parts that matter. And I do. He looked at her. You always did. Delilah's chest tightened. She looked away. Don't say that. Why not? Because it's been years. Because you left. Because I built a life for Maisie without you. And now you show up with peanut butter waffles and kind eyes and... She cut herself off, shaking her head. Julian stepped closer. Delilah, I'm not here to rewrite the past. I can't. But I want to be part of the future. Yours, if you'll let me. But especially hers. Delilah swallowed hard. You don't get to show up and just have that. I know. I don't expect it, but I'll show up every day if I have to. I'll earn it. They stood there in the kitchen, the silence between them humming with history and hope. And then Maisie stirred in the living room. Mama? Delilah turned. I'm here, baby. Maisie rubbed her eyes. Is he staying for dinner? Julian looked to Delilah, unsure. She met his gaze, then nodded. Yeah, he's staying. Maisie smiled, and that was it. A single expression that pulled the air out of the room and filled it with something else, something warmer. Hope. Real, terrifying, beautiful hope. Julian pulled out a chair, sat down, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like he was visiting someone else's life. It felt like the beginning of finding his way back home. The quiet hum of the dishwasher filled the kitchen, soft and rhythmic like a lullaby. Maisie had fallen asleep again after dinner, curled up on the living room rug in a blanket cocoon, her sling still neatly fastened. Julian had helped wash dishes without being asked, his sleeves rolled up, his watch resting by the sink. It was strange, how easily he fit back into the rhythm of her home, as if he had never left. Delilah leaned against the doorframe, watching him dry the last plate. You're still neat, she said, her voice low. Julian glanced over his shoulder. Hospital habits. Order keeps the chaos quiet. She nodded, folding her arms across her chest. You always did like control. He set the plate in the cabinet and turned to face her. I lost it the moment I saw you in that exam room. Delilah's throat tightened. He took a cautious step closer. It wasn't just shock, Delilah. It was regret. Deep, immediate. And it hasn't let me breathe right since. She held his gaze, steady but guarded. You can't undo 7 years with bedtime stories and dinner dishes. I know. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. But I want to try. I'm not asking you to pretend the past didn't happen. I'm asking for a chance to matter now. Her eyes flickered to the living room. Maisie shifted in her sleep, the blanket slipping slightly from her shoulder. You know she's everything to me, Delilah said quietly. I could tell the second I saw you with her, Julian replied. You built a life around her, and you did it beautifully. Delilah blinked back sudden emotion. It wasn't always beautiful. I still want to know all of it, he said. The nights you were scared, the birthdays I missed, her first word. I want the memories, even if they're second-hand. Her voice cracked. Her first word was light. Julian froze. Delilah let out a soft breath. She was playing with a flashlight, pointing it at the ceiling and giggling. I thought it was gibberish, but then she did it again. Clear as day. Light. He stepped closer. his voice a whisper now. That's what you've been for her, hasn't it? Delilah shook her head. Don't romanticize it. I made mistakes. Who hasn't? She looked up, something fragile and fierce flickering in her eyes. You have a fiancé, Julian. The words dropped between them, like a rock in still water. Julian nodded slowly. I do. Then why are you here? He hesitated. Because being with Tessa never made me feel the way one evening in this house just did. Delilah's breath hitched. I know that's a selfish thing to say, he went on. But when I left Savannah, I thought I was chasing something bigger, and I caught it. But it was empty, because it didn't have you in it. She stepped back, like the words had pushed her too close to the edge. He didn't move. I'll walk away if you tell me to. But I won't lie to you. I still love you, Delilah. That's never stopped. The air seemed to hold still with them, a single thread pulled taut between past and present. She shook her head slowly. I don't know what to do with that. Just don't shut me out. I don't even know who you are anymore. Julian looked toward the living room. Then let's start with who I want to be. The next morning brought a crisp breeze and cloud-filtered light as Delilah opened the flower shop's side door, arms full of peony crates. She was halfway through setting up the front display when she heard a sharp, unmistakable voice behind her. Well, you've been busy. Delilah turned slowly. Tessa Vaughn stood at the edge of the sidewalk in her sleek blazer, one hand on her hip, the other clutching a takeaway coffee she hadn't touched. Her eyes scanned the storefront like she was deciding whether it offended her. Delilah straightened. Can I help you? Tessa smiled thinly. I think you already have. Delilah tilted her head. Excuse me? I came by to return Julian's umbrella. He left it in my car after our foundation meeting last week. I stopped by the hospital and imagine my surprise when I heard he left early to have dinner here. Delilah forced herself to remain calm. That's between you and Julian. Tessa said, stepping closer. Is it? Delilah wiped her hands on her apron. If you came here to make a scene... Oh no. Tessa laughed softly. This isn't a scene, it's a reminder. Julian and I are engaged. Our lives are planned. Our families, our careers, they're aligned. We are not a fling from another life. Delilah didn't flinch. Neither was I. Tessa's jaw tightened. Delilah stepped forward now, her voice steady and low. You're right. He is your fiancé. But if you're that worried about what happened over one dinner, maybe you should ask yourself why. Tessa's face hardened. Don't mistake his guilt for affection. Delilah gave her a slow, pointed look. And don't mistake your control for love. The two women stared at each other, the tension sharp as glass between them. Finally, Tessa stepped back, adjusting her blazer. Enjoy your little homecoming. It won't last. She turned and walked away without another word. Delilah stood still, hands clenched, heart pounding. Not in fear, but in fury. Not at Tessa, at the truth. Because Tessa wasn't wrong. She was scared this wouldn't last. Scared that letting Julian in meant opening up the part of her that still remembered how badly it hurt to watch him leave. But as she turned back to the flowers, her eyes landed on the bouquet Julian had brought last night. Hydrangeas and snapdragons, tucked in a mason jar on the windowsill. They were still standing tall. Maybe, just maybe, so could she. The clouds hung low over Savannah that morning, as if the sky itself couldn't decide whether to cry or hold back. Delilah watched the gray light filter into the flower shop through the front windows, dust motes floating slowly in the air, undisturbed. She couldn't shake Tessa's words. "Enjoy your little homecoming. It won't last." Delilah wasn't afraid of Tessa. That woman wore power like a designer blazer, tailored and calculated. But what scared Delilah, deep down, was how much truth sat behind her polished threats. She knew Julian had changed. She'd seen it in the way he handled Maisie, in the way he stood still when he wanted to chase after the past. But she also knew people could say all the right things, make all the right promises, and still leave. Again. The bell above the door jingled, breaking her thoughts. "Thought I'd find you here," came a familiar voice. Delilah looked up and nearly smiled. Janelle stood with a tote bag slung over her shoulder and a box of still warm cinnamon rolls in her hands. "I brought bribery," she said, lifting the box like a peace offering. "And curiosity." Delilah chuckled, tension releasing just enough to let her shoulders drop. "Please tell me you also brought advice." "Depends," Janelle said, walking over to the workbench. "Is this about your surprise dinner guest or his ice queen fiancé who tried to verbally lasso you outside your own shop yesterday?" Delilah blinked. "How did you—" "Savannah's got ears, girl, and 2 of them work at the bakery next door. Word travels." Delilah let out a long breath and handed her friend a cup of fresh coffee. "It wasn't a fight. Just a moment." "Oh, I've had moments like that. Usually right before someone gets slapped." Delilah gave her a look. "Figuratively," Janelle corrected quickly, grinning. They sat in silence for a few moments, chewing on cinnamon rolls and thinking about too many things at once. "I don't want to fall into this," Delilah finally said. "It's too fast, too messy, too unfinished." "Sweetheart," Janelle said gently, "love doesn't wait for clean corners. Sometimes it shows up with mud on its boots and a whole lot of baggage. I didn't invite it. No. But maybe you left the door unlocked." Delilah looked down at her coffee, steam swirling above the rim. "I don't know if I trust him." Janelle leaned closer. "Do you still love him?" Delilah didn't answer. She didn't need to. Julian stood on the back patio of his townhouse, looking out over the small garden he never had time to care for. His phone was in his hand, but he hadn't touched it in 20 minutes. Tessa had texted 3 times. Short, clipped messages. "Need to finalize seating for the foundation dinner. Mother wants to review the speech draft. You're expected at 6:30. Please don't be late." He hadn't replied. Instead, his mind kept drifting back to the sound of Maisie's laugh and the look on Delilah's face when he said he wanted to earn a place in their world. He wanted to be the man she remembered, the man he used to be before ambition became armor. His fingers hovered over a new message. To Delilah. "Hey, if you're okay with it, I'd love to pick Maisie up from school today. Just for ice cream. Just me and her. No pressure." He stared at it for another full minute before pressing send. It took less than 30 seconds for her reply. "Okay. Just keep it simple, and bring her back by 5. His heart thumped once, hard. He grabbed his keys. Delilah stood at the kitchen window, arms crossed, watching the street. The clock ticked past 4:30. She could feel every minute press into her ribs. She hadn't told Maisie that Julian was picking her up. She didn't want to create an expectation or a heartbreak. But when the silver SUV pulled into the driveway and the passenger door flung open, she heard Maisie's voice before she saw her. "Mama!" He got me a mint chip cone with sprinkles. Delilah stepped outside, just as Maisie barreled up the steps and into her arms. "Did you have fun?" she asked, smoothing a sticky curl from her daughter's forehead. Maisie nodded enthusiastically. "We made up dinosaur names for all the cars we saw. Mine was a Ford Osaurus." Delilah laughed in spite of herself. "That sounds ferocious." Julian stood beside his car, hands in his pockets, watching them with something close to awe. Delilah met his eyes over Maisie's shoulder. "She said something," he said quietly, walking closer. Delilah's stomach tightened. She said, "I always thought my daddy would have kind eyes. I think yours are perfect." Delilah's breath caught. Her gaze fell to Maisie, who was now trying to lick the last of the ice cream off her wrist. "She doesn't know the truth yet," Delilah said. "I didn't say anything," Julian replied. "I swear. I just listened." Delilah nodded slowly. "She deserves to hear it from me." Julian lowered his voice. "Would it be okay if I'm there when you do?" The question pulled something loose in her chest. And maybe trust didn't have to arrive all at once. Maybe it could come in moments like these, soft, patient, real. She looked at him. "Yes, but not today." He nodded. "Whenever you're ready." They stood there, suspended in the golden haze of the early evening. Maisie tugged at her hand. "Mama, can he come to my school's Fall Fest next Friday?" Delilah looked to Julian again. He waited, this time without asking. She turned to Maisie. "We'll see, baby." But her voice lacked the hesitation it once held. Julian smiled, quiet and thankful. And in that simple exchange, something shifted. Small, invisible, but undeniable. A seed planted. A beginning, still unfolding. The late afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Augustine Elementary, casting soft rainbows on the linoleum floors as parents trickled into the multipurpose room. Fall Fest had begun, and the school buzzed with homemade booths, raffles, cider stands, and the laughter of children racing between craft tables and face-painting stations. Delilah stood at the corner of the bake sale booth, her hands smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her cardigan as she scanned the crowd. Maisie was off with her friend Lila, sticky with pumpkin glaze and glitter tattoos. Somewhere, Janelle was trying to keep their raffle table from tipping over, but Delilah's mind wasn't on cider or cinnamon rolls. He said he'd come. Julian had texted that morning, short, simple, "If you still want me there, I'll be at Fall Fest by 4. She hadn't replied, not because she didn't want him there, because she did. Too much. A familiar laugh cut through the noise, low and unmistakable. Delilah turned. There he was, standing near the ring toss booth, towering awkwardly next to a group of overly enthusiastic PTA moms. His blazer was slightly wrinkled, like he'd thrown it on in a rush, and his hair had that just slightly winded look that always made him seem less polished and more real. Maisie saw him before Delilah could call her back. She sprinted across the yard, waving both arms. "Doctor! Julian! You came!" He bent instinctively, catching her in a gentle side hug, so as not to jostle her healing shoulder. "Of course I did. I couldn't miss the Fall Fest queen in action." She beamed. "Want to see my scarecrow? It's kind of sideways, but it's got googly eyes." He laughed. "Lead the way." Delilah watched as the two disappeared toward the art display, something stirring in her chest, a soft ache, tangled with something warmer. Hope, maybe, or fear, pretending to be hope. "Careful," came Janelle's voice behind her. "Your heart's showing." Delilah smirked without turning. "Don't start." I'm just saying, Janelle said, stepping beside her. A man leaves work early in dress shoes to look at googly-eyed scarecrows. That's not a small gesture. He's good with her. He's trying with her, Janelle corrected. That's the part that matters. Delilah looked down. I still haven't told Maisie the truth. She's smarter than you think, Janelle said gently. She already knows something. Kids always do. They just wait for us to catch up. Delilah exhaled slowly. Then, Delilah? The voice cut through her like ice water. She turned slowly, already bracing herself. Rosa Cross. Julian's mother. Older now, but still regal. Pearls, tailored jacket. Her silver hair swept neatly into a French twist. There was always something surgical about the way Rosa looked at people, like she was analyzing them for flaws she could correct. Delilah's throat tightened. Mrs. Cross. Rosa gave a nod that was more posture than greeting. I thought I might see you here. Maisie's a student, Delilah said simply. It's her school. Of course. Rosa's eyes moved subtly around the yard before landing on Julian and Maisie across the field. He told me. Delilah's hands tensed at her sides. Told you what? Everything. Rosa's tone was quiet. That she's his. Delilah didn't move. And? Rosa's expression softened, unexpectedly. You should have told him, she said. Years ago. Delilah's breath caught. She didn't expect that. Not from her. I thought I was protecting her, Delilah replied quietly. From what? From feeling abandoned. Rosa looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, Delilah didn't see the woman who once whispered to Julian in sharp tones about sacrifice and future and obligation. She saw a mother, one who had regrets. I pushed him, Rosa admitted. When he got into Johns Hopkins, I told him to go. Told him not to look back. I thought I was helping him stay focused. I thought love could wait. Delilah swallowed. It didn't. No, Rosa whispered. It didn't. They stood in silence for a beat. I see her in him, Rosa said, looking across the lawn again. The way he smiles now, the way he slows down when she speaks. You gave him something I never could. Delilah blinked, stunned. Rosa turned to her, voice a notch lower. You don't have to like me, but don't keep them apart for fear of what might go wrong. Love rarely shows up the way we plan. And just like that, she walked off. Delilah stood frozen, unsure what had just happened or why her hands were shaking. Across the lawn, Julian looked up. Their eyes met. He smiled, soft and steady. Delilah walked over, her heart pounding louder with every step. Maisie spotted her first. Mama, he saw my scarecrow and didn't even laugh. Julian smiled. It's a very serious scarecrow. Delilah knelt beside her daughter. Baby, can you go get us 2 cups of cider? Janelle's at the drinks table. Maisie nodded and ran off without question. Delilah stood, facing Julian now. My mother used to say people either show up when it counts, or they don't. Julian's smile faded into something more solemn. I'm trying to show up. You are. A pause. I need to tell her, Delilah said. She needs to know who you are. Julian nodded. Whenever you're ready. I think I'm ready now, he swallowed. You sure? Delilah glanced toward Maisie, who was now balancing 3 cups of cider and flashing a triumphant smile from across the yard. I want her to know the truth, Delilah said, her voice thick, And I wanted to hear it from the both of us. Julian blinked, then nodded again. Then let's do it. Together. Maisie arrived, handing them each a cup with apple juice dripping down her sleeve. Delilah took it, heart thudding. "Hey, Pumpkin," she said softly. "Can we sit and talk for a minute?" Maisie looked up, wide-eyed, sensing the shift in the air. "Am I in trouble?" Julian knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart. But there's something important we want to tell you." Maisie looked between them, and just like that, the air changed. Not heavier, not darker, but deeper. Like they were finally stepping into a chapter long overdue, and no matter how fragile it felt, they were stepping in together. They sat on the worn wooden bench, just behind the apple-bobbing station, the late October sun casting a warm, golden hue over the schoolyard. The laughter and music from Fall Fest faded to a low hum, like background noise from another world. Here, in this quiet corner, the moment had taken on its own gravity. Maisie sat between Delilah and Julian, her small legs swinging just above the grass, the last of her glitter tattoo slightly smudged on her wrist. She glanced up at both of them, eyes wide, sensing something big was coming, but not yet afraid of it. Delilah reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. Her voice was gentle, steady. "Maisie, sweet pea, we want to talk to you about something important." Maisie blinked. "Is this about my shoulder again? 'Cause I promise I won't do cartwheels until January." Delilah smiled, the moment cracking just enough to breathe. "No, baby. This is about family." Julian leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice matched hers, soft, careful. "You remember how you said I had kind eyes?" Maisie nodded. "Yeah, like stories in them." He chuckled under his breath. "Well, one of those stories is about a boy who met a girl, a long time ago, before there were white coats and stethoscopes, before he knew who he was supposed to become." Delilah continued, her eyes never leaving her daughter's. "That girl, she had a lot of dreams too. She loved flowers and books and the way the sky looked before it rained. And one day, that boy left, because he thought he had to, not because he wanted to." Maisie looked between them, her brow furrowing. "Were those two people you?" Delilah nodded, her throat thick. "Yes, baby. We were those two people." Julian exhaled slowly. "And what we didn't know back then was that a little piece of our story would come into the world a little while later, a piece with the brightest laugh and the bravest heart." Maisie blinked once, twice. Then her voice came, barely a whisper. "Me?" Delilah reached for her hand. "You." There was a pause, a single breath where the world waited. Maisie looked down at her lap, her fingers twisting together. "So, you're my daddy?" Julian's eyes shone, his voice breaking. "Yes, I am." Maisie didn't speak for several seconds. Her nose twitched, like she was holding something back, sorting feelings too big for her small body. Then, quietly, "Did you know the whole time?" Julian shook his head. "No, sweet pea, I didn't know. Not until recently." Maisie's lip quivered. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Delilah wrapped an arm around her. "Because I wanted to wait until I was sure the time was right, until we could tell you together. I wanted it to be safe." Maisie didn't pull away, but her voice dropped. "It kind of makes me feel like I was missing something, and I didn't even know." Julian leaned closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can't go back and fix that, Maisie. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be here now, to be your dad. However you need, however you want." Maisie looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "Do you want to be my dad?" Julian's voice cracked. "More than anything." A long beat. Then, slowly, Maisie leaned into him. Just a little, just enough for her shoulder to rest against his arm. "You're gonna have to learn a lot of dinosaur names," she mumbled. Julian's eyes closed, a shaky laugh escaping his lips. "Deal." Delilah watched them both, her heart aching in all the right ways. The weight she'd carried for years, of secrets, of silence, began to loosen, thread by thread. Maisie looked back up at her. "Can we still keep things the same? Like, you and me? Movie nights and pancakes?" "Always," Delilah said softly. "You and me. That's forever." Maisie nodded, then reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a slightly crumpled drawing. "I made this in art last week. I was going to throw it away, but maybe you can have it, Daddy." Julian took the paper with careful hands. It was a drawing of a big heart, colored in with different shades of pink and purple. Inside the heart were 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small. They were all holding hands. He couldn't speak. He didn't need to. Delilah rested her head against Maisie's for a moment, letting the silence speak for them. Then, from somewhere across the field, the music changed. An upbeat song beginning to play, and kids yelling for more games. Maisie looked up again, life rushing back into her limbs like a sudden gust of wind. "Can I go play with Lila now?" Delilah nodded. "Go on, baby, but stay where I can see you." Maisie took off, the ends of her hoodie bouncing behind her, her laughter echoing like a promise in the air. Julian stood slowly, still holding the drawing. "She's everything." Delilah stood beside him. "I know." He turned to her, quieter now. "Thank you for letting me be a part of her life." Delilah looked at him for a long moment, then finally said what had been sitting on the edge of her heart for days. "I didn't do it for you." Julian's brow furrowed. "I did it for her. But if you really mean it, Julian, if you're going to stay, to really stay, then maybe, eventually, we figure out what that looks like." A beat. Julian nodded. I want to earn that." She gave a small smile. "One dinosaur fact at a time." And with that, they turned toward the yard again, side by side. Not yet a couple, not yet a family, but maybe, finally, facing the same direction. The bell above the shop door chimed, slicing through the stillness of the morning. Delilah looked up from her ledger, her fingers still holding the page, where this month's bills didn't quite add up to this month's revenue. Maisie had gone off to school with a fresh braid and her dinosaur lunchbox. The house had been quiet this morning, but it was the kind of quiet that buzzed, like something was about to shift again. Julian stepped in, holding a to-go tray with 2 coffees and a small brown bag that was already starting to show grease stains. "I come bearing peace offerings," he said, his smile tentative. "And sugar." Delilah raised a brow, setting the ledger aside. "You trying to bribe me?" He handed her the cup marked D. "Only if it works." She took it, careful not to brush his hand. "You're lucky I skipped breakfast." "Beignets from Celeste's," he added, lifting the bag. Now she smiled. "You do know how to apologize." "I wasn't aware I had something to apologize for." Yet. He stepped closer, his tone light, but there was something under it, something heavier. Delilah sipped her coffee, letting the warmth settle her nerves. Then what's the sugar really for? Julian hesitated. I've been offered a promotion. She blinked. Already? You've only been back 3 months. Chief of surgery, he said quietly. They want to announce it next month. Delilah's stomach turned. He noticed. It's not out of nowhere. Dr. Herrera's retiring, and the board asked me to apply. I didn't expect them to offer it this quickly. And you're considering it. His silence was answer enough. Delilah set her cup down, slower than she needed to. So what happens if you take it? Long hours, travel, nights on call. Probably. And if you don't? He shrugged. Tessa will tell me I'm wasting my potential. There it was. The weight of another world, the one he'd lived in before her, before Maisie, the one that still called him back like a lighthouse with a flickering bulb. Delilah crossed her arms. You said you wanted to be present, to build something real. I do. Then what does that look like, Julian, if you're being pulled in 10 different directions? Julian stepped forward, his voice tightening. I'm trying to figure that out. I didn't come here today to fight. We're not fighting, she interrupted, her tone sharper now. We're talking about the choices you make when no one's watching. Julian looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tense. This isn't easy for me either, Delilah. I'm trying to balance everything. You, Maisie, work. My life doesn't come with clean corners. Neither does mine, she said. But I don't get to walk away from the hard parts. His face shifted. Hurt, maybe. Or guilt. He ran a hand through his hair. I want this. I want us. But I also want to be the man Maisie can look up to. Then be that man, she said, her voice quieter now. But don't do it by proving something to a hospital board or your fiancé. He flinched slightly at the word. Tessa, she said, folding her arms again. You haven't told her yet, have you? Julian looked down. I see. I tried, he said finally. She doesn't listen when I bring it up. She talks right over me. Plans weddings. Sends me spreadsheets of floral arrangements. Delilah gave a bitter half-laugh. That sounds familiar. He looked up again. It's like I'm living 2 lives. Well, she said, her voice almost gentle. Eventually, you're going to have to choose one. There was a beat of silence, so thick, even the hum of the fridge in the back seemed to pause. I've been thinking about something, Julian said finally. What's that? My lease ends next month. Delilah froze. Julian continued, slow and deliberate. There's a house not far from here. Near the park. 1 story. Wraparound porch. I drove past it twice before I called the agent. She blinked. You're thinking about staying. I'm thinking about rooting. Delilah felt the weight of it. Not just the words, but what they meant. A man who'd lived most of his adult life in airports, in surgical scrubs, in hotel conference rooms with name tags clipped to his chest. He was talking about roots, about stillness. I want to be around for the school plays, he said, for flu season and Christmas concerts and scraped knees. You sure? She asked. I'm still learning, he admitted, but I'm sure about this. Delilah looked at him, long and hard. Her guard didn't drop, not fully, but the edge of it softened. And then the shop door chimed again. This time it was Evelyn Vaughan, in a sleek navy suit, heels that didn't belong on this street, and a clipboard in hand. The matriarch of the hospital's board, and, unfortunately, Tessa's mother. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on Julian. "Ah, found you." Julian stiffened. "Evelyn." She gave Delilah a glance. Not rude, not kind, just dismissive. "I assumed you weren't answering because you were in surgery, but here you are." Julian straightened. "I turned my phone off." Evelyn walked in farther, uninvited. "The foundation wants an updated quote for the press release about the promotion." Delilah's heart thudded. "I haven't accepted yet," Julian said, measured. Evelyn's brows lifted. "You're the face of this hospital, of the entire South Georgia expansion project. You're not going to make us look foolish by dragging your feet." Delilah felt something hot rise in her chest. Not jealousy, frustration. This was what their world looked like. Evelyn glanced at Delilah again. "I trust you're a friend?" Delilah stepped forward, calm but clear. "I'm the mother of his child." Evelyn's face didn't move. "Ah." Julian stepped between them slightly. "Evelyn, I'll call you later." "I'm sure you will." Her voice sharpened. "But you'd better decide soon, or the board will." She turned and exited as quickly as she'd come. Silence. Delilah looked at Julian. "That's what you're tied to." He nodded, his face unreadable. Delilah stepped back toward the counter. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Julian. But you do have to decide who you want to be when no one's watching." Julian nodded again, slower this time. And for the first time since he'd come back, Delilah saw it. Not the doctor, not the ex, not the man with titles or polished shoes. She saw the boy who left, and the man trying to become more than what he once ran from. He took a deep breath. Then he said, "I'm going to talk to Tessa tonight." And Delilah just nodded, because that conversation, when it finally came, would change everything. The light outside Delilah's kitchen window had turned dusky, that soft blue-gray, right before nightfall, when the sky couldn't decide if it was done for the day. She stood at the stove, absently stirring a pot of creamy tomato soup, though her appetite was gone. Maisie was humming behind her, perched on a stool with a coloring book and 2 broken crayons. The quiet buzz of home should have brought peace, but Delilah felt like a held breath. She kept looking at her phone, waiting for a text that didn't come. Julian had said he was going to talk to Tessa tonight. That was hours ago. Maisie broke the silence. "Mama, can we watch the Snow Globe movie again tonight?" Delilah glanced over her shoulder, smiled softly. "Only if you promise not to cry again when the puppy gets adopted." "I only cried a little," Maisie protested, holding up a pink crayon with the tip worn down to a stub. Delilah teased. It was a 4-tissue scene. Maisie giggled, then returned to her coloring, lips pursed in focus. Delilah turned back to the soup, but her heart wasn't in the moment. Her eyes drifted toward the window again, her mind somewhere else entirely. What was taking him so long? She didn't want to admit it, but she was scared. Not that he wouldn't choose them, that he would, and something would still find a way to break it all apart. Just as she reached to turn down the burner, her phone buzzed. "Julian, can I come by?" Her heart jumped, then thudded, hard and uncertain. She texted back, "Yes." 15 minutes later, he was at the door. She opened it before he knocked. He stood there, rain dampening the shoulders of his coat, his eyes holding something, an intensity that wasn't quite pain, but wasn't relief either. "Hey," she said softly. He stepped inside. "Hey." Maisie poked her head from the living room. "Doctor..." Julian, want soup? Julian smiled at her. I'll have some in a minute, sweetheart. Delilah gestured toward the hallway. Can we talk? He nodded. She led him to the den, a quiet space off the main living area. She closed the door gently behind them. He didn't sit. She didn't either. How'd it go? She asked, folding her arms to keep her hands from trembling. Julian looked down, then met her eyes. I told her everything. Delilah's breath caught. And? She cried, got angry, accused me of sabotaging our future. Delilah waited, the ache growing behind her ribs. Julian took a deep breath. She asked me if I was in love with you. Delilah froze. I didn't lie, he said. I told her I don't know what to call it yet, but I know what I feel when I look at you, and I know what I feel when I look at Maisie. And that's more real than anything I've had with her in years. Delilah's throat tightened. So it's over? He nodded. It wasn't a clean ending, but it's done. Silence stretched. Julian ran a hand through his damp hair. Evelyn's furious. Tessa's convinced I've thrown away everything. Delilah's voice was quiet. Did you? He stepped closer, his voice low. I don't think so. Because what I had wasn't whole. It was a version of life people told me I was supposed to want. Success, appearances, a legacy. But what's a legacy if I miss my daughter's childhood? If I sit in an empty house 5 years from now, wondering why it all feels so hollow? Delilah's eyes burned. I want to be part of her world, he said. Not just drop in for school plays. I want to know her favorite cereal, the name of her stuffed animals, how she likes her eggs. Delilah swallowed. She likes them scrambled, with ketchup. Julian smiled, just barely. Then I'll learn to make them that way. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. A small, worn envelope. I found this, he said, handing it to her. She took it carefully. What is it? Something I wrote, years ago. After I left, I never mailed it. But I think I meant every word. Delilah opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the faded ink. Her breath caught at the first line. If I could go back to the morning I walked away, I would choose you. Every time. She stopped reading. Her throat was too tight. I know I don't get to erase the past, Julian said. But I'm asking, if we can write something new, even if it's slow, even if it's messy. Delilah looked up at him, the envelope pressed to her chest. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I, he admitted. But that's how I know it's real. They stood in that space of honesty, of soft vulnerability and raw possibility, the air thick with everything unsaid. Then from the living room, Mama, the puppy scene is coming. Delilah let out a choked laugh. She's very serious about her cinematic timing. Julian smiled. We better not miss it. They walked back to the couch, side by side. Maisie patted the cushion between her and a giant plush stegosaurus. Sit here. He's saving the spot. Julian obeyed. Thank you, Mr. Stego. Delilah curled beside them, tucking her legs up. As the movie played, Maisie leaned against Julian's arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. Delilah looked over at them. Her daughter, her once-lost love, the odd little family they were building. She didn't know where the story would go from here. But tonight, with soup in the kitchen and rain tapping against the windows, it felt like the first real chapter. And for the first time in years, Delilah didn't feel alone in it. The knock came just after sunset, when the streetlights outside Delilah's shop began to glow, casting soft orange light across the window display. She glanced up from arranging a bouquet of marigolds and blue thistle, her heart skipping without reason. Business had been slow today. Too quiet. Even Maisie had gone to Rosa's for the evening, insisting on learning to make pecan pie the proper southern way. Delilah opened the door with a smile half-formed, expecting a late customer. It wasn't. Tessa, in a blazer sharp enough to cut glass, hair pinned and flawless, heels that didn't belong on this side of town. But her eyes were what stopped Delilah cold. They weren't cruel or dramatic. They were calm, dangerous in their quiet. "Tessa," Delilah said, her voice steady, but her body already on alert. "I didn't expect—" "No, I don't imagine you did." Tessa's smile was tight. She stepped inside uninvited, her heels clacking across the hardwood. "It smells like rosemary and regret in here." Delilah closed the door, slower than necessary. "If you came here to throw a fit, I think you've got the wrong audience." "I'm not here to fight." Tessa turned to face her. "I'm here to clarify." Delilah folded her arms. "Then get to it. I know Julian told you we're over. And maybe you think that's a victory." Tessa's voice stayed even, controlled. "But I want to be very clear about something. He's not yours." Delilah tilted her head. "He's not a possession. He's a legacy," Tessa snapped, a crack in her voice now. "He's the product of decades of work, influence, medical board seats, endowments. Do you think it's coincidence he was offered chief so quickly? Or that my mother backed him when no one else on the board would?" Delilah said nothing, her silence louder than any interruption. Tessa stepped closer. "He was built for more than this florist shop life. For more than story time and pancake Saturdays." Delilah's jaw clenched. "Then why are you here, Tessa? To remind me he doesn't belong in our world?" "No," Tessa said, her voice dropping. "To remind him." Delilah took a slow breath. "If you cared about him, truly, you'd want him to be where he's whole, not just where he looks good on paper." Tessa's eyes narrowed. "You think love fixes everything? That your little Hallmark family will stand up when the hospital board starts asking questions?" Delilah's heart beat faster. "Questions?" Tessa smiled again, cool and composed. "You really thought there wouldn't be consequences? That the hospital's golden boy could throw away a prestigious engagement and no one would notice?" Delilah said nothing. She could feel it coming, the shift. The moment stories like hers always hit the wall, built by power and politics. "Let me tell you how this will play out," Tessa said, brushing invisible lint off her sleeve. "There will be rumors, questions about professionalism, about patient privacy, about whether a certain ER doctor overstepped boundaries when he started visiting a local florist's home." Delilah felt her breath catch. "You'd do that?" "I won't have to," Tessa said with a soft shrug. "Whispers do the work for you, especially in towns like this." Delilah's eyes locked on hers. "You're not angry he left. You're angry he left for us." Tessa flinched, just slightly, but Delilah pressed on. "You think you built him, but you forgot. You didn't grow him. You didn't see the way he reads bedtime stories with different voices, or how he cries when Maisie says she's proud of him. You built a resume. We built him." Silence. Tessa blinked once. Then she turned on her heel, walking to the door. But before she opened it, she looked back. "You'll lose him again. Maybe not today. But one day. Because love can't compete with legacy." And then she was gone. The door clicked shut. Delilah stood there for a long time, the weight of the words wrapping around her like winter air. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood. Because Tessa was wrong about one thing. Love wasn't weaker than legacy. But it had to be chosen. Again and again. Even when it was hard. Even when it hurt. And she wasn't the one who needed to choose. That night, when Julian walked through her door with a new bedtime book in hand, she kissed him a little longer, not out of desperation, but to remind him this was the life he said he wanted, and now the world was watching to see if he meant it. 3 days passed. The florist's shop bustled with its usual rhythm, wrap paper crackling, the soft scent of baby's breath and eucalyptus lingering in the air. But Delilah moved through it with a quiet storm beneath her skin. The encounter with Tessa hadn't left her, not really. It lingered in her thoughts like a film of dust on glass, always there, clouding the light. Julian hadn't mentioned anything about the board, and she hadn't asked. But every time his phone buzzed and he glanced at it too long, something curled in her stomach. That morning, the weather had turned colder than usual. A gray chill pressed against the windows, and Delilah had just lit the small space heater under the counter when Rosa walked in, her knitted shawl clinging to her shoulders and a look on her face that made Delilah straighten instantly. "Good morning," Delilah greeted, uncertain. Rosa didn't return the smile. "We need to talk." Delilah blinked. "About Maisie? Is she okay?" "She's fine. She's in the back room coloring with Daisy." Rosa's lips thinned. "This is about you and Julian." Delilah's shoulders tensed. Rosa walked slowly to the counter and placed both hands on it. "I saw Evelyn Vaughan at the church pantry yesterday. She made a comment about rumors, about the board having concerns regarding Julian's judgment and professional ethics." Delilah's stomach dropped. Rosa narrowed her eyes. She was calm, too calm, which means she already lit the match and is waiting for the fire. Delilah looked away, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Tessa came here a few days ago. She warned me this would happen." Rosa's voice was sharper than usual. "And you didn't tell Julian?" "I didn't want to make things worse." "You think keeping him in the dark is protecting him?" Rosa said, her voice rising. "Delilah, he's not just fighting for love. He's fighting for us, for Maisie, for a life that's nothing like the one he was groomed for. He deserves to know the battlefield." Delilah swallowed hard. "I was scared." Rosa's expression softened slightly, but she didn't back down. "I was too once. When my husband told me he wanted to open a bakery instead of staying in the family trade, I thought I'd lose everything. I didn't. But I nearly lost him." Delilah blinked back sudden tears. Rosa stepped closer, placing a hand over hers. "Don't let fear speak louder than love, Mija. He has to face this, but not alone." Delilah nodded slowly, the weight in her chest shifting from fear to resolve. Later that night, the three of them, Delilah, Julian, and Maisie, sat around the small dining table, sharing leftover lasagna and mismatched stories from their day. Maisie chatted about an art project at school, while Julian laughed softly, his hand occasionally brushing Delilah's under the table like he needed to feel she was real. When Maisie ran off to brush her teeth, Delilah reached into the drawer beneath the wine glasses and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. Julian looked puzzled. "What's this?" he asked, setting down his fork. "It came by courier today," she said, "from the hospital." He opened it and read quickly. His face drained of color. "They're launching a formal review," he murmured. Delilah nodded. "Because of us." He looked up sharply. "This isn't your fault." "No, it's our reality." Julian sat back, the paper still in his hand, his eyes clouding. Delilah reached across the table and took his hand. "We can't pretend this storm isn't coming. But if you want to weather it with us, I'll stand beside you, even if it gets ugly." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They think love is a liability." She gave a small smile. "Then let's prove them wrong." Julian stared at her like she was the only anchor he had. Then he turned his hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "I'll call a press conference. I won't let them write the story for me." Delilah's heart thudded. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said. "I'm done living for someone else's legacy." In the hallway, Maisie's voice rang out. "I used the strawberry toothpaste this time." They both laughed. It was quiet, but it was real. And in that moment, Delilah realized something. Storms didn't just tear things apart. They also cleared the sky. The next morning, Savannah felt heavier. Not just the weather, though a low fog clung to the rooftops like a whisper not ready to leave. It was something else, something unspoken. Delilah stood by the front window of her shop, her hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold an hour ago. She watched as Julian stepped out of his car across the street dressed in his navy suit. Not hospital scrubs, not weekend denim. This was a statement kind of day. He adjusted his cufflinks at the door of the medical center, shoulders square, jaw tight. A man walking willingly into fire, not because he had to, but because he chose to. She didn't wave. He didn't look back. But still, they were together in it. Later, while trimming white tulips at the counter, Delilah's phone buzzed. One word from Rosa. Streaming. She rushed to the back room, pulled up the hospital's local channel feed, and held her breath. Julian stood at a podium in front of a modest row of microphones. The banner behind him read, "St. Jude Regional. Integrity in practice. Compassion in care." Reporters murmured. Cameras rolled. He looked calm, but there was a tension around his mouth she recognized. He was holding back something. Not nerves. Conviction. "Thank you for being here," Julian began, his voice steady. "This won't be long." He paused, scanning the room, then continued. "In recent weeks, questions have been raised regarding my personal and professional life. My involvement with Delilah Monroe and her daughter Maisie has been brought into scrutiny. Some have suggested that my personal choices compromise my integrity as a physician." He glanced briefly at someone off-screen. Delilah imagined Evelyn Vaughn, seated with that same icy smile. "I want to make something clear," Julian said, stepping slightly closer to the mic. "There was no misconduct, no breach of ethics, no exploitation of my position. The truth is simpler than the rumors." A pause. "I reconnected with someone I once loved, and I discovered I had a daughter I never knew existed. That connection didn't compromise my values. It revealed them." Delilah's breath caught. He pressed forward, voice growing firmer. "Medicine teaches us to heal with our hands, but I've come to understand healing must also come from truth, from owning our pasts, even the parts we've buried under ambition." Reporters scribbled. Some leaned in. Julian looked directly at the camera now. "I will not apologize for being a father, or for loving the people I love." Silence in the room. He let it stretch, let it sting. "If that means stepping down from a title, so be it. I'd rather be known for standing with my family than for climbing a ladder that asked me to leave them behind." Then a simple nod. and he stepped away from the podium. Delilah sat frozen, her hands trembling around the phone. The feed cut. Just like that. Maisie peeked in from the hallway, holding a squished juice box. "Mama?" Delilah swallowed. "Yeah, baby?" "Did he do the brave thing?" She smiled, tears forming. "Yeah, he did." That evening, the shop closed early. The town was buzzing. A few customers came by just to offer a nod of respect. One woman slipped a handwritten note through the mail slot. "We see you, and we're with you." But it wasn't until later, when the door jingled softly and Julian stepped inside, that Delilah exhaled for the first time all day. He looked tired, but there was a kind of lightness in his face she hadn't seen in years. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "I think, for the first time in a long time, I am." She crossed the room slowly, standing in front of him. "You didn't have to give it all up." "Yes, I did," he said. "Because this, you, was the only part of my life that ever made me feel like more than a nameplate on a door." Delilah pressed her forehead gently against his chest, his arms wrapping around her, like they finally knew where to rest. "I don't know what happens next," she murmured. "Neither do I," Julian said, his voice quiet. "But it's ours to figure out." Outside, the fog began to lift. The town, the sky, the space between what was and what could be, clearing just enough to let hope through. The days that followed moved slowly, quiet, almost too quiet. Savannah buzzed with murmurs, but for once they weren't sharp, they weren't cruel. The whispers that reached Delilah's ears were full of wonder and warmth. "That doctor stood up for his girl, can you believe it? He gave up everything to be a dad. I always said she was stronger than she looked." Delilah heard them while arranging bouquets, while passing the produce stand, while walking Maisie home from school. The voices didn't sting anymore. They hummed like background music to a life that was finally hers again. Still, there was one voice she hadn't heard yet, and it was starting to echo in her heart. Julian. They hadn't spoken much since the press conference, just small things, dinner plans, school pickups. Shared glances across the shop when he stopped in for coffee, but something between them remained suspended in mid-air, like a question neither had dared ask. Was love enough now, or had the damage already written its own ending? The question pressed harder that Thursday morning when Delilah found a sealed envelope under the doormat. No stamp, no name, just one line on the front, "For when you're ready." Inside was a folded sheet of thick stationery, his handwriting neat but hesitant. "Delilah, I meant every word I said at the podium. But there's one thing I didn't say aloud, because I was scared I hadn't earned the right to say it. Not again. I love you. Not because we have a child, not because you forgave me, but because you're the only person who ever asked me who I wanted to be, and waited long enough to let me become it. I don't know what comes next, but I know I want it with you. If you'll have me. Julian." Her hands trembled. The florist shop faded into a blur. The tulips, the clock ticking, the world outside, it all went still. That afternoon, she closed the shop early. Rosa was already in the garden when she arrived, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in soil, humming an old hymn that wove through the ivy like wind. Delilah walked slowly across the path. "Do you believe people can start over?" Rosa didn't look up. "No." Delilah blinked. "Oh." Rosa smiled, still tugging at a stubborn weed. "I believe they can pick up where they left off, and carry forward with more wisdom, more grace." She stood and dusted her hands. "You're not starting over, Mija. You're finally picking up the right thread." Delilah whispered. I'm scared it's still fragile. Everything worth having is, Rosa said. But you tie enough threads together, it starts to hold. That night, the porch light outside Delilah's house flickered gently as she stepped out in a soft blue dress, Maisie's locket around her neck. Julian was waiting at the end of the walkway. Not in a suit, not in scrubs, just jeans, a white shirt, and that same look he gave her the first night they kissed under the dogwood tree all those years ago, like she held the sun in her palms and didn't know it. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said quietly. Delilah smiled. I wasn't sure either. They stood in the glow of the porch light, silence curling between them. Then she said, You still have the ring? His breath caught. I do. Then ask me again. He stepped forward, pulled the small velvet box from his coat pocket. Not with grand theatrics, not with practiced words. Just this. Will you let me love you for the rest of my life? With everything I've got? Even the broken parts? Delilah nodded, eyes shining. Only if you'll let me do the same. He opened the box, and this time, when he slipped the ring on her finger, it fit perfectly. Not because the size had changed, but because they had. Inside, behind the screen door, Maisie watched with wide eyes and a crooked smile. She didn't cheer. She didn't clap. She just whispered to no one in particular. I always wanted a daddy. Now I got two best friends. And the stars above Savannah blinked to life, soft and steady. Just like promises, finally kept. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of light Savannah rarely saw. Soft, golden, quiet as a secret. Delilah stood barefoot on the front porch, watching the early fog rise from the garden beds Rosa had planted decades ago. Baby's breath and lavender shimmered with dew, while the roses, her mother's favorite, seemed to bloom just for this day. There was no grand venue, no towering archways or crystal chandeliers, but somehow it was perfect. Inside the house, laughter floated from the kitchen, where Maisie and Daisy giggled over burnt waffles and pink lemonade in teacups. Rosa hummed from the back room as she gently pressed Delilah's veil, her hands slow, reverent, not rushing, just remembering. Delilah turned when she heard the door creak. Janelle stepped into the room, her eyes already misty. Oh, honey. Janelle pressed her palms to her chest. You look like a prayer, someone finally whispered loud enough to be heard. Delilah smiled. Is it strange that I feel calm? Janelle walked over and fixed a small strand of hair behind her ear. No, baby, that's not strange at all. That's what peace feels like when it finally comes home. There was a knock at the back door. Rosa peeked out. It's time, she said softly. The ceremony took place in the garden, beneath the arbor Julian had helped build himself just a week before. It was wrapped in white linen and sunflowers, Maisie's choice. Friends and neighbors filled the rows of wooden chairs. There were no reporters, no cameras, no headlines. Just the hush of community, the flutter of programs in hand, and the faint scent of honeysuckle in the air. Julian stood at the front, his eyes locked on Delilah as she walked down the aisle, her hand gently resting on Maisie's shoulder. They walked together, no one giving her away, because she was never anyone's to give. She had chosen this, chosen him. Maisie wore a white dress with yellow ribbons, holding a small bouquet that looked a little like the first one Julian ever bought Delilah when they were just kids. Delilah had found it pressed in a book 2 weeks ago. She hadn't told him. Some memories weren't for retelling. They were for reliving. When they reached the arbor, Rosa stepped forward. She'd insisted on officiating. "I ain't a preacher," she said with a grin, "but I know a thing or two about love that doesn't quit." Everyone chuckled softly. She held out a small, worn Bible. "These were the vows I used at my wedding. I've added a few lines." "I hope you don't mind." Delilah shook her head, tears already burning. Rosa cleared her throat, then looked between them. "Love is not a promise that nothing will go wrong. It's a commitment to keep choosing each other, especially when it does. You two, you've already walked through fire, and you're still standing. That says more than 1,000 rehearsed vows ever could." Julian took Delilah's hands. His voice was quiet, but every syllable rang with truth. "I walked away once, out of fear, out of pride. I missed years. I missed you. But I promise you now, with everything I am, never again. No title, no legacy, no ambition is worth more than waking up and seeing your face, and hers." Delilah's voice shook. "I spent too many years learning how to be strong alone. I never thought I'd need anyone again. But you didn't come back to rescue me. You came back to stand beside me. And that's all I ever wanted." Rosa smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek. "Well then," she said, "by the power vested in me by sheer will and the grace of Georgia Garden weddings, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The crowd laughed and clapped. Julian leaned in and kissed Delilah like he had no more apologies to offer. Just love. Just now. Just forever. Afterward, there was music. Guitars and an old upright piano someone had rolled in from the community center. The cake was lemon with cream frosting, made by 3 local grandmothers who hadn't agreed on anything in 20 years. Until now. Maisie danced barefoot on the lawn, twirling in circles with Daisy, her laughter skipping like stones across the breeze. Later, when the sun dipped low and the guests started to leave, Delilah and Julian sat on the porch steps, shoes off, arms tangled like they were made to be that way. "Do you ever think," Julian asked softly, "that maybe everything had to fall apart for us to find our way back?" Delilah looked at him. "I don't know if it had to," she said. "But I know I wouldn't change it." Julian kissed her temple. "Me either." They watched as Maisie curled up on the porch swing, half asleep, still clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. Her hair stuck to her cheek, her thumb near her lips, her breath deep and even. Julian whispered, "She's going to remember today, forever." Delilah nodded. "We all will." A quiet settled over them, not the kind that felt like something was missing, the kind that said, "You're home now." And as the sky turned a shade of gold that only Savannah knew how to paint, Delilah rested her head on Julian's shoulder and closed her eyes. The past had tested them, but the future, it was finally theirs to write, together. Thanks for watching Inspire CC Stories. For more unforgettable stories that touch the heart and uplift the soul, keep coming back to Inspire CC. Until next time, stay inspired with Inspire CC, where every story is a journey worth taking.